What happens when you hand the keys of a global airline to a man who only cares about money? You get the most brutal, methodical, and entirely legal corporate assassination in American history. In 1985, a ruthless Wall Street billionaire executed a hostile takeover of Trans World Airlines. He had absolutely zero interest in aviation. He didn't want to fly planes. He wanted to strip the company for parts. To pull off this heist, he used billions of dollars of high-risk junk bonds to buy the airline. Then, he forced the airline to pay off the massive debt he used to buy them. He sold off their most valuable assets, crushed their workforce, and instituted a parasitic deal that bled them dry for an entire decade. This wasn't just a bankruptcy. This was a financial vampire draining the blood from one of the most iconic empires of the 20th century. While Pan Am collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance and a changing market, TWA was actively pushed off a cliff by Wall Street. This is the true story of how the greed of one man destroyed Trans World Airlines. To truly understand how deeply TWA fell, you have to understand the incredible heights they started from. Before the Wall Street raiders arrived, TWA wasn't just another commercial airline. It was the personal playground of the richest, most eccentric, and most brilliant man in the world, Howard Hughes. Hughes took control of the airline in 1939, and he didn't just want to transport passengers, he wanted to conquer the sky. Under Hughes, TWA became a global powerhouse. While Pan Am dominated the massive oceanic routes, TWA dominated the airspace above America and Europe. They built the most futuristic airport terminal on the planet in New York, a massive swooping concrete structure that looked like a bird taking flight. It was an architectural marvel. They flew Hollywood royalty, politicians, and billionaires. If Pan Am was the airline of the world, TWA was the airline of the stars. Hughes was obsessed with speed and technology. He personally financed the development of the Lockheed Constellation, a plane so advanced and beautiful it revolutionized commercial travel. By the time the 1970s rolled around, TWA had transitioned into the jet age with a massive fleet of Boeing 747s. They were a titan of industry. They employed tens of thousands of people and held some of the most valuable international flight routes on Earth. But in the corporate world, massive size makes you a massive target. The very things that made TWA powerful, its huge fleet of physical airplanes, its valuable real estate, and its irreplaceable international flight routes, were about to become the perfect bait for a terrifying new breed of financial predator. But before the predator could strike, the airline had to bleed. In 1978, the United States government signed the Airline Deregulation Act. For decades, the government had tightly controlled ticket prices and routes, ensuring that legacy airlines like TWA and Pan Am practically had guaranteed profits. Deregulation threw the doors wide open. Overnight, legacy carriers were forced into a brutal, bloody price war with cheap, non-unionized startup airlines. Suddenly, TWA couldn't compete. They had massive overhead, expensive union contracts, and aging planes. They started hemorrhaging money. Their stock price tanked, dropping far below the actual value of their physical assets. The empire was wounded, bleeding in the water, and on Wall Street the sharks could smell it. Welcome to the 1980s, the era of the corporate raider. This was a completely new breed of Wall Street financier. They didn't build products. They didn't provide services. They hunted for struggling companies whose stock prices were artificially low. Their strategy was brutally simple. Buy a controlling share of the company against the management's will. Fire the executives. Chop up the company's assets. Sell them to the highest bidder. And walk away with billions of dollars in personal profit. It was called asset stripping. Carl Icahn was the apex predator of this era. He looked at the struggling TWA and didn't see an airline connecting people. He saw a flying bank vault. Icahn realized that if he literally sold off TWA's planes, their airport gates, and their lucrative flight routes, the cash he'd get would be far more than what the company's stock was currently trading for. But there was a catch. Even with a low stock price, buying an entire global airline costs billions of dollars. Icahn was rich, but he didn't have billions of dollars in cash just sitting around. So, how do you buy something you can't afford? To buy TWA, Icahn turned to the most toxic financial weapon of the 1980s, the leveraged buyout, fueled by high-yield junk bonds. A leveraged buyout, or LBO, is a financial magic trick. Imagine taking out a massive mortgage to buy a beautiful house. But instead of you paying the mortgage every month, you force the house to pay its own mortgage. And if the house can't pay it, the bank forecloses on the house, and you walk away unbothered. With the help of infamous financier Michael Milken, Icahn borrowed billions of dollars from investors at insanely high interest rates. These were the junk bonds. He used that borrowed money to aggressively buy up TWA's stock until he owned the airline. And the absolute second he took control, the trap snapped shut. By law, he was allowed to transfer all of that massive debt directly onto TWA's balance sheet. Overnight, the airline went from struggling to survive to suddenly owing $3 billion in high-interest debt that they had absolutely nothing to do with. The bomb was planted. In late 1985, Carl Icahn officially took control of TWA. The airline's board of directors had tried desperately to fight him off, begging the government to step in, but Icahn had Wall Street's infinite checkbook on his side. When the dust finally settled, the raider had won. And the very first thing he did was declare war on the people who actually ran the airline. Because TWA was now saddled with billions of dollars of debt, the airline had to pay hundreds of millions in interest payments every single year just to survive. To find that cash, Icahn demanded brutal wage cuts from the employees. The mechanics and the pilots' union, terrified of losing their jobs, eventually caved. But the flight attendants refused. In March 1986, 5,000 flight attendants walked off the job in a massive strike. They thought it would force Icahn to negotiate. They were wrong. Icahn didn't flinch. He simply fired them all and hired non-union scabs to replace them. The luxurious, star-studded culture of Howard Hughes's airline was instantly shattered on the picket line. Employee morale dropped to absolute zero. The experienced flight attendants were gone. Service plummeted. Flights were delayed. Passengers, tired of the terrible service and endless strikes, started choosing other airlines. But here is the terrifying truth about corporate raiders. Icahn didn't actually care about customer service. He didn't care if the passengers were happy. He only cared about extracting cash from the assets. And since the airline wasn't making a profit from flying people anymore, he decided it was time to start chopping off its limbs. This is where the true horror of asset stripping begins. In the aviation industry, the most valuable thing an airline owns isn't its planes. It's the legal rights to fly into specific airports. And TWA held the crown jewel of the industry, the highly restricted, incredibly lucrative rights to fly directly into London Heathrow. In 1991, desperate to generate cash to pay down his crushing junk bond debt, Icahn sold TWA's London routes to American Airlines for $445 million. Selling the London routes was absolute financial suicide. That specific route was the only part of the airline that was making consistent, massive profits. Selling it was like selling your own heart to pay for a blood transfusion. You get the cash, but you guarantee you are going to die. TWA was now a hollow shell of its former self. It had no profitable routes, an aging fleet of gas-guzzling planes, a furious workforce, and billions in debt. But the final, fatal stab wound came when Icahn finally agreed to leave the company in 1993. As part of his exit deal to settle the massive debt he had created, he forced TWA to sign something called the Caribou Agreement. This deal allowed an entity controlled by Icahn to buy any TWA ticket at a staggering 45% discount and resell it to the general public. It was the worst deal in aviation history. For nearly a decade, Icahn's ticket operation leached an estimated $50 million a year from TWA. It was a parasitic drain that guaranteed the airline could never, ever recover. Even though the raider had left the building, his ghost was still robbing the cash register. Gutted of its best assets, crushed by debt, and bleeding cash to its former owner, TWA spent the entire 1990s as a zombie corporation. They filed for bankruptcy in 1992. And then, incredibly, they filed for bankruptcy again in 1995. They couldn't afford to buy new, fuel-efficient planes. Their fleet aged into flying antiques. The airline that once pioneered luxury travel was now a national joke. And then, unimaginable tragedy struck. In 1996, TWA Flight 800 exploded over the Atlantic Ocean shortly after taking off from JFK, killing all 230 people on board. While federal investigators eventually determined it was a tragic mechanical failure involving a spark in the center fuel tank, the public perception was sealed. Fair or not, TWA was seen as an old, unsafe airline falling apart at the seams. People stopped buying tickets. The end was near. In 2001, after a third and final bankruptcy, what was left of Trans World Airlines was swallowed up by American Airlines. The iconic red TWA logo was erased from the sky forever. Carl Icahn walked away a billionaire. The 30,000 employees who spent their lives building the empire walked away with nothing. The murder of TWA remains the ultimate chilling lesson in American capitalism. Sometimes, an empire is worth more dead than alive. If you want to see exactly how Pan Am made a $5 billion mistake that killed their empire, click the video on screen now. Subscribe to Altitude Zero for more deep dives into the spectacular fall of aviation's greatest titans.